The question is, how do you evict a tenant when you have ticked all the boxes and you can provide all the recommended or required documentation to the court without going through a court hearing? Let's have a look. We are currently in the process of evicting a tenant, early stages though, and we are using Section 21, which still until April 2026 you can do before the Renters Act or the Renters Bills comes into force. But I have a feeling that even after that comes into force, this process is going to be around the same, but it will require a court hearing. So it's important that you at least know how it works, and it will give you some details and some insights as to how a court in the UK for eviction works, and some details as to why courts are overworked and overloaded, and I'll discuss that at the end, which is actually quite important if somebody from the court system is listening to this, because it would be very, very important that changes are made to decrease this process by at least 60 or 70%. I mean, the time it takes to do this. Now, as I said, let's have a look at the process of what is called an accelerated eviction process, because you have served a notice to your tenant, and then the process won't involve a court hearing. At least that's the first part of the plan. But how did we start with this current process? To use it as an example, we served Section 21 to the tenant, and we had to give him 2 months as per requirements for him to leave. When we handed the notice, he immediately said we would have to take him to court because he wouldn't leave. So we already knew this was going to happen. But before you serve Section 21, you need to take into account several aspects to make it valid. And that is, for example, that the tenant has been with you for at least 6 months, and other requisites that you need to check to make it valid. Otherwise, it won't be. And you need to give that tenant 2 months notice. And then after those 2 months, you can start proceedings if the tenant doesn't leave. That's why right here on this block, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so you can have a look. And if you're listening to the podcast, what I'm showing here is a process flowchart as to how the whole thing works. But don't worry, I'll describe it to you, and so you understand it. So the whole process starts as I said. We have here on the process flowchart tenant, arrears, and Section 21. Now, for Section 21, you cannot quote that they are in arrears. I'm just showing in this particular example, the tenant is paying erratically. He's got financial difficulties, even though he's getting payments from the government. He still doesn't manage to pay. We've talked to him. We've given him facilities to do that, but even like that, it's quite erratic. So we decided to give Section 21 and continue with the whole process. As I said, since the time that you give Section 21 to the time that you can actually take that person to court is at least 2 months. So that's why on this chart, you can see month 0 to 2 is because you need to wait for that time. That's what is going to require. Now, if for some reason you could negotiate with the tenant to leave somehow, maybe you won't chase that tenant because of the arrears, money in arrears that tenants have, and then that way that tenant will leave sooner. Maybe that way it can happen, because if you take him to court, that person is going to get a CCJ, which is a court claim, and is going to remain in his financial records for at least 5 years. And nobody wants that, because it's going to be difficult to rent another place, even if it's a room. it's going to be difficult for that tenant to proceed with his or her normal life. Nobody wants that. And if that negotiation happens, well, the landlord will save time, the tenant will save all this pain and these bad records on his credit history, and therefore is a lot easier, even though the landlord is going to lose some money right there. But let's say that doesn't happen and the tenant still wants to stay or doesn't want to leave, which is the case for this particular example I am giving now. From that stage, you'll have to go to phase one, which is for you in the podcast. There is another block here that says phase one, and this is a pre-court preparation and notice, which is critical for you now. For the Section 21, you should have kept records, which is as a Form 6A at the moment, which is effectively you need to give that notice on a special form for the government, which is 6A. You can download it on the website, and you can use it in that way. So if you serve this notice, Section 21, in another form that is not that one, then you're going to have a problem. And again, the whole process of evicting a tenant is a lot to do with the details and with the records and keeping traceability. And that's what on other episodes of my podcast and my videos, I was talking about professionalization of landlords, because all this takes a lot of records, and to ensure that everything is met for each single tenant is very important. But also, I wouldn't say it's difficult, but you need to be organized. That's what it is. At the end of the day, it's a list that you basically tick the boxes. And if you do it consciously for each tenant just before they start the tenancy, then you're going to have a better chance of getting this right. Now, this phase one, which you can see here in pre-court preparation and notice, means that to serve this Section 21, you would have this checklist again, that EPC for the property. At the current regulation, the property cannot be more than E, because EPC is from A to G, and the property needs to be at least E to be rented. And in 2030, I think that's going to change to C. It's going to be more difficult for properties to be rented and valid. But that's another subject. So you need to make sure you have your gas certificate, you have your EPCs right, that you have the how to rent guide that was provided to the tenant, that you have protected the deposit, and that you've given to that tenant that certificate of deposit. What we normally do is that with the certificate of deposit, we get the tenant to sign it. So we have proof that he or she has received the information, and we have on the contract as well a space to say for the tenant to say, yes, I have seen the EPC, I've seen the gas certificate, I have seen the electrical certificate, and the how to rent and other documents that you need to provide. So at the same time, you go through each tenancy with each tenant and you make sure the list is ticked, then by this time it would be great. Also, the timing is important, because hopefully, for example, the deposit protection is done within 30 days, but then the gas certificates and all other documents are signed as seen before the tenant moves in. And all that's important because when you complete these documents for the court, then all the timing is asked. And what the judge wants to see is that you've ticked the boxes, and then you have traceability for that. So that's effectively what I'm showing here in terms of the prerequisite checks and serve as Section 21 now. The other thing that happened, and I'm just actually moving on this point where Section 21 was served, and apologies because I'm going backwards a little bit, is that something that happens very often is that when you serve a Section 21 or when you serve a Section 8 to a tenant, they will refuse to sign it. And then what I recommend you do in that case is you go and serve Section 21 with a witness, and that witness signs, and you also sign that you were there on that day and that the tenant refused to accept the notice, which happens really often because they get nervous, they don't want to sign anything. So you just need to make sure you are there with a witness. If it's a single let, then the Royal Mail postage proof signed for or a special delivery is a good way to prove that that notice is being given to a tenant. But if it's, for example, a HMO and you're trying to get a tenant out from one of your rooms, then this witness part becomes more important because you will have to present that evidence to the court. And that's very important to provide. So witness proof, pictures if possible, and you will have to provide that copy of the Section 21, which is signed by whoever witnessed or handed the notice. And also you'll have to complete a form, which again is the bureaucracy of the courts, which is called N215, which is a service notice which explain to the judge how you serve that notice. Is another document explaining how you did one of the important steps. Very important that you do all this and you have all that information. Now, once you know that you have all this information and it's month to day one, and hopefully before, you would have to prepare all the documentation what you need to complete to actually send to the court. So the way this works is basically you have to prepare 3 bundles. So is the accelerated form for the court, where you complete all the information that is required for to explain to the court what you want to do. So there you would have who's the landlord, who's the tenant, addresses, how you prepared the notices, the gas certificate, and you need to complete is about 6-7 pages of different questions that you need to complete. And just to show you what that form is, because it's important, is the N5B England one, and the court fee at this time of the year or 2025 is £404, which you can also add legal representative costs, which I think the court will award you up to £80 or £100, and then you can put the total amount here, which then you can add to the money claimed from the tenant. Obviously, whether they pay you or not is a different thing, but this is the money that, again, you can tell to the tenant, look, this is going to cost me £400 plus more money to get you out of my property. I might write off part of the debt that you have with me. Why don't you leave early? And then we negotiate or something on those lines. Now, going back to our flowchart, which is phase 2, where we need to prepare all these 3 bundles, as I said, and these 3 bundles contain the form N5B, which I just showed you. Then it also needs to contain a copy of all the documents that you gave the tenant at the tenancy start, meaning EPC, meaning gas safe certificate, meaning the how to rent, meaning the deposit certification. All the documentation you need to provide need to go there in 3 different bundles, 3 different copies. The reason why is because again, the court won't take copies for you, and the court will keep a copy for them. Then they will post one of those copies to the tenant, explaining about the process and giving them 14 days to reply, which that's phase 3 of the process. But stay with me. And and one copy will be sent back to you. And I would suggest you keep one copy for you so you know exactly what you sent in case something gets lost. On top of that, what you need to do is a check for £404. In this case, as I showed you before, so you can pay the fees for the court, and here is where what I said at the beginning is just incredible, that the courts at this time and in history, they don't accept an electronic transfer. So you can imagine that somebody has to receive that check, they need to put it in the system, they need to cash it, and before that happens, they cannot process your application before that happens. So that little step there is causing delays already, plus the fact that you need to send 3 different copies and they need to process those, where actually this could be done somehow electronically. That's how you can decrease 70% of the time for this whole process, to help landlords and to help tenants as well, because the response is going to be easier and faster. And that's why the court system, which is overloaded and which is going to become even more overloaded when the renter's bill comes in, because there is not going to be other way by taking the tenants to court. And it's just crazy that this is the case. But having said that, that's the process we need to follow. So we need the check. We need 3 copies of everything and keep a copy with you. That's month 2, day 1. You need to choose which court. Here in this block for phase 2, you need to choose which court is closest to the property you are renting, and because that means hopefully the court is going to cover that area, which is important. You cannot try to evict a customer, a tenant from Liverpool, and then with a court in London. That just doesn't work. It needs to be as close as possible to your property. And you need to think ahead in this process. And thinking ahead is that if the judge decides that you are going to get your property back, then the next part would be, let's say they would tell the tenant that they need to leave by a certain date. But if the tenant decides not to leave, then there will be a next stage, which is the bailiffs. And at that stage of the bailiffs, because the bailiffs are also overloaded and the bailiffs are part of the public service, then if the court part of the process is a quick one, then probably the bailiff part is not going to be quick. But there is a way to try to accelerate this. You will have to pay more money, but you can accelerate it, which is stapled to your form N5B, which I showed you before. You can write a letter requesting to the judge the section 42, which is to request to transfer this case to the High Court enforcement officers, which are private bailiffs. And by doing that, you can save easily 8 months of your time. By doing this, it's more expensive, but when you compare that to the rent you're paying, it's going to be cheaper in the long term. Actually, I made a video about that before, and therefore you can go and watch it. But this is important. As a landlord, you need to know this process and you need to understand how accelerate it. So this is a way to accelerate it. This is why I'm taking the time to explain you this, and hopefully you go through the details and then you can get this right. Now, if you don't want to go through the pain of doing all this yourself, you can hire a lawyer. That is going to increase your costs, obviously, but you pay for knowledge and you pay for less stress, I would say, in that case, right? So again, if we go to phase 3, which I have actually already talked a little bit about it, you send the 3 copies of everything, you send the check, you send the letter requesting a High Court transfer with your N5B form, you chose the right court, and what should happen is that the court should take between 6 to 10 weeks. That's about 2 months if you're lucky. And they will issue a claim, which they will send one of your copies to the tenant with a date for them to reply to this inquiry. And then if they reply or not, then the judge will review, which is a not hearing. There wouldn't be a hearing if you check all the boxes and you send all the right documents. And if that's the case, then the judge, hopefully would order a possession order. And if you send the High Court transfer request, then you can then go to get the private bailiffs, which is effectively something that you should do, and that's part of the process. Now, the tenant, in an ideal scenario, they would leave once the court tells them you need to leave by this date, and they would leave, right? So that's an option. But then the other one is that they don't leave. Which I just explained, and then you need to go to phase 4 of the process, which is, I'm showing here another block. And the High Court enforcement officers, they were faster than the bailiffs, and they are prepared for tenants which might resist the eviction, which is different than the bailiffs, which if they receive some resistance, they will just leave, and then we'll have to book another date, another time to come with the police. But the private ones, the High Court enforcement ones, are better prepared, and that's why is a better service. It's a private service in that case. Now, the problem is that with the High Court enforcement officers, we are talking about that you will have to pay £78 to apply to the High Court once the judge gives you the go ahead to do that. Then you'll have to pay around £800, £1,000 more for the services of the High Court enforcement officer. But again, that's not too much if a tenant is not paying and and the rent per month is £1,500. That's 1 month rent. They will give 7 days notice to the tenant, and then the eviction date. And if you want to change the lock, then you can do that. Otherwise, you can save the money, and they do it faster. That's the process, but it's a process that is to do a lot with details, with you checking the boxes at the right time and doing things correctly. That's why you need to create a system. That's why you need to manage things properly, keep records, have checklists, and understand how with every new piece of regulation, any new piece of regulation, all this is modified your checklist, modify your systems, and then you can do it. Now, the total estimated time with this structure, with this sort of process that I'm showing you here, is between 4 and 5 months, and the process is going to cost you, excluding the lost rent, between £1,000 and £1,500. That's what the cost would take you to get a tenant out, and starting with Section 21 and then recovering in your property. But again, if you have not checked the boxes, if you've done it in a disorganized manner, then it's going to be a lot difficult, and then you would have to do a court hearing, which is going to be more expensive and longer. That's why I recommend you learn really well what you're doing, professionalize yourself, get all the checks in place, and hopefully when this happens, then you at least you know this video exists, and then you can try it and find your way to get it right. Now, before I go, please subscribe to this channel. Please follow the podcast if you haven't done so. You can get more information at propertycashflow.co.uk. You can even download our free property investment, UK property investment toolkit, where I give you 15 toolkits of 15 tools that you can use to expand your knowledge in property. So you have checklists, you have actual calculators for BTL, actual calculators for commercial residential conversion to for commercial to residential conversions. You have actually also you have even a video game that I call the property cash flow game for you to go and actually play the computer to increase your knowledge and simulate your journey towards your financial freedom or growing your portfolio. It's an amazing game to play. We keep improving it and we keep doing more and more for you. So nobody's going to give you these sort of tools in the market. And you will only have to pay 99p if you're in the UK or 4.99 if you are in another country. But we'll give you very good information in terms of how the UK property investment operates. Also, if you have properties in Liverpool and Wirral that you need managed, that you want managed, or you want to invest in those areas, please also let me know at info@propertycashflow.co.uk, and then we can start a conversation. Hopefully this information was useful. Hopefully will save you headaches and money. That's why we all need to work together, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.